Speaker this morning, and he's Paul Walk from the UKOLN at the University of Bath, of course, in the UK. He's going to be talking to us about the Developer Community Supporting Innovation, or devsci, I hope is the right description of the acronym. Just a brief biography. Paul is Deputy Director of UKOLN, I'm sorry, I've been north of the border too long, based at the University of Bath in the UK, where he's worked since 2006. And prior to this, he worked in the Academic Library at the University of North London and went on to lead the technical development and e-learning systems and related software at London Metropolitan University. At UKOLN, Paul is primarily engaged in developing its role as a JISC-funded innovation support centre, and he gives technical advice to JISC with particular focus on standards and technologies relating to resource discovery, and leads the Developer Community Supporting Innovation, or devsci. So I'd ask you to join me in welcoming Paul talking to us this morning.
Well, good morning. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and have this opportunity to speak to you. I'm going to be talking about something quite different to the previous presentation, and I'm also going to be much shorter, so I won't take too long getting in the way of the coffee break. I'm going to talk about this project, which we've been running for about 3 years now in the UK. I'm going to quickly describe what we've been doing, hopefully suggest some of the impact we're having, and then say a few things about where we're going to go next. So the issue that we're trying to address, I think I could sum up as suggesting that the role of the developer in research and in higher education is not valued. I think many of our individual developers are valued as individuals, but the role itself is not really taken very seriously in an organisational sense. Very few developers make it into senior management. We have, in a sense, no routes for developers to have any kind of strategic impact in institutions. We also have a rich source of talent coming in from our computer science courses or other departments in the institution. And this tends to mean that we are a little lazy about keep holding on to those developers because we're just replacing them continuously. So the upshot of this is that there's no real real investment in developers, in their careers, in the resources that are made available to them, the environments that they're given to work in. And the consequence of that is that we don't get anywhere near the sort of value that I think we might get from our developers. I think a particular issue which we've started to focus on is the simple one of career path for developers who want to work in research or in higher education, but want to retain the developer role. They don't want to have to become part-time developers, academics or managers, but they have no real path through higher education, certainly not in the UK. We've seen in big business around the world that this has been addressed to some extent by introducing senior roles at board level. That the chief technical officer, for example, represents at least a goal that a technical person can aspire to move towards in big business. But we don't have this in higher education. And this means that we, at the higher levels within an organisation, at the strategic level, we're lacking the voice of the person with the very technical perspective. That just gets lost along the way. So the response has been to consider how do we create conditions within which we can give developers a strategic voice. And that's what this project is about. So devsci, it was funded by the JISC, continues to be funded. I'm happy to say we've just had another year's funding, managed by UConn. Well, the first and best developed way that we have found to have an immediate impact certainly on funding, how funding is allocated to projects in the UK, is to run events, and to run events in collaboration with all kinds of organisations, getting people together, getting developers together with researchers, and other people, in fact. There's a good deal of opportunity for cross-domain activity there as well. We sometimes run events which are focused around technologies rather than particular domains or subject areas, and we get people from different domains turning up to those events. So I've got one that I'm talking about particularly there, which is coming up very soon in the UK. Excuse me, which is looking at semantic web applications in the life sciences and supported by those two organisations as well. And that represents a really good opportunity to get technical people together from a variety of backgrounds to actually really explore particular problems. And they will be attempting to do real research, I think, over those 2 days. They'll be drilling down into data sets around diseases, malaria, and so on. At the bottom, I've just listed a bunch of other activities. These are all things which we've done in recent times. That is actually the tip of the iceberg, but it gives you a sort of flavour of the range. Another type of event which we've run and with some success is more about empowering our developers. So it's actually about developing the capacity of the individual developers working within our sector. One really interesting event we ran a couple of years ago was we recognised a problem which our developers had, which in general, and I am generalising, but they generally seemed quite poor at presenting the ideas, the things they were working on to non-technical audiences, particularly in a succinct way. And this tended to put them at a disadvantage when they were had an opportunity to get somebody's interest who might have some money, for example, to continue to pay for their activities. So we put them through media training, which was not something they were necessarily generally very comfortable with. But if you're interested in this, we videoed we asked them to do a 45-second pitch, and we taped it, and then we gave them some media training, and then we asked them to do the pitch again and videotape that too. I don't know why I'm talking about videotape nowadays, but that's just a phrase. I'm sure we use some digital camera. But those files are all on the web. They're openly available, and you can see the before and after in each case, and it's actually quite instructive, I think. And the guy in the picture there was the guy that won the most improved pitch in our event. We also, and this has really grown quite organically and has really just come from the developers themselves, the notion of very short, focused peer-to-peer training sessions. So we have things that we call code dojos, for example, where the sensei will sit with a group of 20 developers and teach them something quite specific that they have expertise in. And so at our more general events, and the one I've got there is our biggest annual event, which is a large event where we get hundreds of developers together. We have many of these small training sessions where people are just really taking somebody through something quite specific. And interestingly, as an exercise, we went out and costed up the commercial cost of such training and discovered very quickly that we were delivering tens of thousands of pounds of training in a single day at one of our events, essentially for free, just with an enthusiastic peer-to-peer approach, which I think is a wonderful outcome, actually, and it's useful for me as well because I can actually put monetary figures against the impact of our work, which is always useful. Another aspect of allowing our developers to have a high-profile input into funding decisions is to issue challenges, and this is something which is quite common now in the sort of general developer community, but we've used this on many occasions now, and in fact we have commercial sponsors who will quite often put up a prize attached to a challenge. Some of the vendors of systems that are pertinent to our domains have realised that this is an opportunity for actually getting fairly high quality, cheap testing of their APIs. So there's actually a nice quid pro quo arrangement there, and they support us in what we do. I think this one was sponsored by Microsoft Research, but we've had other sponsors as well. That picture, by the way, is David Tarrant, who's in the room, I think, or certainly at the conference. There he is. I would urge you to go and have a look at that one. It's a great performance. He took a Microsoft Kinect and essentially started depositing files into a repository using the SWORD protocol by waving at this interface and making polite gestures to him. It's actually very good. A more recent development, and this has been certainly not driven by devsci, but I recognised early on that this was interesting and relevant, so I started to work with the University of Lincoln, and we are running a joint event with them very soon. They have a program which they call Student as Producer, where they're investing very heavily in the idea of their undergraduates actually contributing to the business of the university, to involve them at every level in the decision making in a quite a serious way. They also have a marvellous team of developers that were entirely drawn from the student body and have been building all kinds of genuinely useful applications and, in fact, infrastructure within that institution in an extraordinarily agile and user-focused way. And I think what they're recognising is the value of students, clearly, but my perspective on this is this inexhaustible supply of talent that I talked about earlier. And this is really about engaging those people even earlier, because we have tended to pick them up once they've graduated and try to offer them jobs and keep them for a few years, whereas Lincoln are actually getting in there right at the beginning of their engagement with the institution. So by the time they would come to work for the institution, they're already very well versed in how certain aspects of higher education research work. I think this is a really interesting idea. So I alluded to the big developer event that we run annually. We've run this for the last 3 years, Dev8D. This event was really the brainchild of Ben Osteen, who's also possibly in the room. He's here today somewhere. There he is. And David Flanders of the JISC. And at its height, I think we got to about 400 developers. This is an event over 3 or 4 days with a massive array of activities, people hacking stuff together, collaborating, hardware hacking, all kinds of training opportunities, etc., etc. And I'm delighted to say that Dev8D has reached Australia, and the first inaugural Dev8D AU was held last Sunday here. Thanks to Steve Androulakis and Jared Winton, who put it together, and it's a kind of a humble beginning, but actually that's a feature, that's a good thing. You want these things to begin in a humble way, because then they grow properly rather than trying to fund some massive intervention right from the word go. So, and the impression I got was that there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm in the room for this, and I suspect it will start to grow. They will certainly do this again. So the thing that I'm focused on for the future really is I've talked a little bit about how we're helping developers to have a strategic voice in the sector, but we've not really managed to do anything about giving them that role within the institution. Notwithstanding Lincoln's interesting experiments, this is actually quite rare. Developers just really don't have that access within institutions. But recently we've surveyed stakeholders within UK universities, everybody from academics through to managers, librarians. And I think this is slightly informed by the work we've already done. I think we've had an impact, and I think if we'd done this survey 4 years ago, we might have had a slightly different response. But nonetheless, I think there's a clear understanding that developers have a role to play in the local context, and also that they are undervalued. I think that people seem to be recognising this with institutions, so I have reasons to be cautiously optimistic. What I want to do is to start to develop this idea of what I'm calling the strategic local developer. And this is a mixture of a couple of ideas, really. It's the notion of a developer who has an ability to have a strategic impact on the institution, is given the opportunity to do that. That means it probably needs to be a developer who has worked there for some time, has worked in the sector at least for some time, has a certain amount of experience under their belt, as well as being a good developer, they have that domain knowledge, which we tend to lose because we lose our developers after a few years because they drift off and triple their salary somewhere else. But it's also the issue about having a local development capacity, about actually having in-house developers, which I think is crucially important. And I think as we have a trend to outsourcing services, there is a risk that we might feel that we can outsource our capacity to do technical work, to do technical development. And I think that would be a mistake for two reasons. First of all, we would lose our capacity to innovate within our institutions, which seems to me to be not only crucially important for future growth, but it's also what our institution should be about. But secondly, and the kind of more hard-nosed business argument in a sense, is that if we are going to start to rely on services in the cloud, outsourced provision of services in that way, which we are, and there are perfectly good reasons for doing this, mostly to do with efficiency, how are we going to actually ensure that those services are really fit for purpose internally within the institution? Who is going to be doing the work to make that final connection between the local users and this largely undifferentiated, albeit very efficient remote service? Who understands the local business rules? Who understands the local cultural imperatives, the idiosyncrasies of an organisation? And that's why I think we need not only local developers within our institutions with the experience and the know-how, but they also need to have some stake at a strategic level. I'm going to finish with a quote which I picked up recently from Eric Schmidt. He made this statement in the UK a few weeks ago. And it was only this morning, actually, I realised that Victorians is ambiguous in this context, so I'll let you decide what that means. But I think the point is a simple one, and one that I would urge people to consider, which is we need to bring engineers or developers into the very highest levels of our institutions. They need to be around that table and have that input. Thank you for listening.